Hey guys, my microphone's pretty bad. It doesn't seem to want to stand up properly. Also, I'm playing around with some different ways of talking, different tones, different volumes, because I just want to get it. I want to get it right. Anyway, I'm gonna actually read this now. So my videos have been getting longer and longer, and that's not by design. But this video might be a short one, which is weird because it's about a big topic, which I know a reasonable amount about. But it may still be short because it's really only responding to one particular argument, which can be found in this video by Lindy Beige. So in this video, Lloyd basically says, why are we in the EU? That's his question, and he responds to a few responses. One such response is that the reason to be in the EU is because we would be part of the world's largest trading bloc. It gives us access to a huge free market without any tariffs. Now, he offers a response which I'm going to play.
We're in a trade bloc, but we were already in a trade bloc. And there are other trade blocs we could be members of. For instance, there's the EEC. You don't have to join the EU, the political side of it. You could just be in the European Economic Community, or even EFTA, the European Free Trade Association. You can get free trade with the countries of Europe without being in the EU. So actually the free trade argument doesn't work.
Now, first of all, I'm going to address the elephant in the room. The EEC no longer exists. It was a previous incarnation of the EU. I'm not bringing this up to mock or attempt to discredit Lloyd, because we all make mistakes, and obviously it doesn't seem like he scripts his videos, so it's an easy mistake to make. I would prefer, generally, to move away from the mentality of picking apart arguments for broadly irrelevant mistakes, rather than focusing on the substance of the argument. So I only bring this up to say, yes, I'm aware this is a mistake, but it isn't a massive one. However, Lloyd is right, though, to point to the EFTA as a means by which one can remain in the trading bloc without being part of the EU. However, it's worth looking at the reasons Lloyd thinks we should not be in the EU.
The EU cost us a staggeringly vast amount of money, and we forfeit a great amount of our sovereignty, and we get saddled with an awful lot of really stupid, troublesome laws as well.
This is a problem because EFTA members still have to pay membership fees, and they still have to obey all of the same laws. So as far as the costs to both the Treasury and to sovereignty go, the EFTA is equivalent. There's a reason why not many countries are in the EFTA. If the EFTA was some magical deal where you got all of the benefits and none of the cost, then everyone would be in the EFTA. The EFTA is actually, on the surface, a worse deal. You have to pay all of the membership fees, and you have to obey all the laws. But on top of this, you also don't get any say in the European Parliament laws. So why are Norway and Iceland members of the EFTA? Norway and Iceland are in the EFTA because they have very specific economic circumstances that mean they're better off having a unique deal that sacrifices a lot of the benefits of being in the EU and still entails a lot of the same costs, but nonetheless provides very specific benefits to those economies due to their unique situation. So it always used to annoy me when people would appeal to the EFTA in debates about whether or not the UK should remain in the EU. Most people on the street really aren't fit to make a call on whether or not the UK should be part of the EU, because of all the complex variables in that decision are beyond the comprehension of the average member of the British public. The decision to enter the EFTA rather than the EU, however, is even more complicated. To even mention the EFTA in a debate about EU membership, you'd need to have an intricate knowledge of the specifics of the UK economy, the specifics of the minor changes in laws that come with EFTA membership, and a coherent economic model showing how the UK might benefit from being in the EFTA as opposed to the EU. Without any knowledge on any of those topics, the four letters EFTA should not be leaving your mouth. Without any knowledge regarding this, an appeal to the EFTA just becomes a reflexive and meaningless response, which is ironic because Lloyd is fond of calling a lot of the arguments he encounters non-answers and non-responses.
It's the bland, meaningless answer. That's a complete non-answer.
And then he turns around and appeals to an institution which does not solve any of the problems he has with the EU, and with this response he achieves nothing other than batting away the free trade argument, so that at least in the context of this video it will appear that he has handily dealt with all the potential reasons to be in the EU. Now, Lloyd also says that we could just have trade agreements with other countries on a case-by-case basis, and we don't need to be in the EU for that to happen. The problem here is that the appeal of the EU is that it's an absolute free trade area. In an absolute free trade area, you need to have a few things. Firstly, you need to have a certain standard for workers' rights, which is why the EU isn't having a complete free trade area with China anytime soon, because then all of the businesses would just move to China. You also need to have clear rules and regulations about health and safety, and that one really doesn't need an explanation. You also need to have free movement of people, because it can't be an absolute free trade area if you don't have free trade of labour. It also just logically can't be a fully integrated economy if you need to go through cumbersome processes to get visas whenever you want to work in a particular place. And if you have free movement, then you need to have certain guarantees that laws will be fair and just in every single country. This is one of the main reasons we don't have Saudi Arabia in the EU, or any other country with a poor record on human rights and fairness and equality under the law. There also needs to be an attempt to foster some of the same values, because you don't want open borders with countries where people are going to be coming in with significantly different values. And finally, there needs to be an attempt to assure the economies are somewhat equally developed. Imagine if the Democratic Republic of the Congo entered the European Union. Wouldn't be long before the entire Congo basin was empty, because incredibly poor people would all move to the incredibly rich countries. So supranationalism is not some kind of sneaky trick snuck into what was originally a purely economic union. You cannot have an absolute free trade area without moving that area increasingly in the direction of becoming a supranational, state-like entity. This is why, historically, the only absolute free trade areas have been nation-states. This isn't an accident. You need the characteristics of a nation-state for an absolute free trade area to work. Of course, we could have any number of special agreements with the EU without being part of the EU. This is what, for example, Canada has, and they have one of the most elaborate agreements with the EU. Otherwise, we could go for slightly more limited trade agreements. But the point is, however much we limit our involvement with the EU, we also limit our trade with the EU. So yes, we can have some free trade agreements with the EU. We can be Canada, if that's what you're into. But we will never be fully integrated into, nor fully benefiting from, the world's largest free trade area unless we are fully integrated into and fully contributing to the European Union. Also, again, at this point we run into the same problem with the EFTA. You would need a huge amount of specialist knowledge to be arguing that we're better off having a limited set of trade agreements than being fully integrated into the EU. You would require a lot of information and evidence regarding how full EU integration affects the UK, and how the trade agreements we'd be likely to get outside of the EU would affect the UK. This is not impossible to predict, but it requires more knowledge than I, Lindy, and anyone else watching this video possesses. And unfortunately, it seems that the vast majority of people with this knowledge have concluded we're better off in the EU. Now, on the subject of knowledge, I do want to address one thing. I've spoken a lot about knowledge, needing knowledge to determine whether or not we're better off in the EFTA or the EU, needing knowledge to determine whether or not we're better off making our own case-by-case trade agreements, and I at one point said the average person does not possess enough knowledge to make a call on this issue. Of course, this isn't an insult. It's the same as saying we shouldn't put it to a vote what calculations we use when running laboratory experiments. Most people don't know. Now, I don't know if I've ever said this on this channel, but my formal education is in international relations, and I took a module on the EU, for which I read half a dozen books. In terms of the Dunning-Kruger effect I'd say I'm about here, I'm intimately aware of how little I really know about the finer details of the EU. But there is one approach to life which I rely on quite heavily to get by and to grow as a person, and it is this. If I ever encounter a position that seems totally irrational to me, as if there's no genuine justification for it, my first response is to assume that I must be the one who lacks knowledge. I must be the one who is lacking understanding. If I am an intelligent person at all, it's because of that mindset. So many of the beliefs I have today come from me first hearing about something and thinking it was completely stupid and ridiculous, but then considering that perhaps it only seemed ridiculous because I didn't understand it. And upon trying to understand it, I realized I was wrong. Now, I want to give Lloyd the benefit of the doubt here and believe he has made this video as a genuine question. But he certainly doesn't present it that way, and there isn't really any doubt in the comments section. He is presenting a very Eurosceptic position, not the position of a neutral fact finder. But I must make a suggestion that the default position is to favour the EU. Consider for a minute that the vast majority of politicians in this country support Britain being in the EU. More than this, so do the vast majority of people with specialist economic knowledge. Not only that, but the same people in other European countries also believe their countries are better off in the European Union. Undoubtedly, for some of these countries, this is because they're poor and get more out of the EU than they put in. But for several other countries, they contribute just as much, if not more than us, at least per capita. Which brings us to the final point. The UK has uniquely favourable terms and conditions for being in the EU. We got a special deal with other countries, which other countries did not get. But still, those others only ever have small, Eurosceptic political groups. Six books into understanding the EU, and I'm a long way from being able to make any argument about the precise economic implications of every level of integration the UK could potentially have in the EU. I have broad arguments that leave me convinced we are better off in the EU, which I will present in another video. But if you're just going to turn this into an argument of what about a hypothetical cocktail of standalone trade deals agreed upon outside of the confines of the EU, I'm afraid very few people will be able to argue on those terms, as most people couldn't accurately predict what type of standalone trade deals are likely, nor their exact effect on the UK. And the two things we can rely on are broad arguments and expert opinion, both of which I believe are on the side of remaining in the EU. But I don't want to make this video outrageously long, as my videos have been getting longer and longer recently. This video has achieved its main purpose though, because the ball is now in Lindy Beige's court. He said there's no reason to be in the EU that justifies the membership fees and loss of sovereignty. Remainers say free trade is a reason. He says that we can be part of the EFTA. I say the EFTA entails all the same membership fees and losses to sovereignty. He says we can negotiate our own separate trade deals. I say we can't accurately predict the results of such hypothetical trade deals, but they will never be as fully integrated as what we achieve in the EU, and certainly can't be considered pure free trade. The fact that Lloyd took the effort to respond to free trade implies he considers it to be a compelling argument. Since we've seen that his response is lacking, Lloyd is now confronted with a credible argument in need of a response. I doubt he will respond, but you know what you could do to make him much more likely to respond is if you went ahead and liked and commented and subscribed and shared and did everything in your power to give me that sweet YouTube algorithm. And I'll tell you what, the amount you need to subscribe this time is greater than it has been yet, because the next video I'm going to do will be a rather brief overview of the entire Harry Potter series. I'm going to keep doing the politics stuff, don't worry, but I have some opinions on films too. I have plenty, and they're great opinions. So I'm confident you'll enjoy the next video. It might be a while coming, because I'm going to be up at my grandparents' this weekend, because my granddad has recently come out of surgery, so I'm going to do some chores and just generally be a good grandson. But if you miss me, you can just go back and watch my old videos. Until then, I've been King Arparazon, and I'll see you later.